and welcome to Driven by Data Live 2025. Please put your hands together and welcome to the stage CEO and founder of Orbition Group, Kyle Winterbottom.
Well, that was embarrassing, wasn't it? Came in today and Kat had shown me some branding. What is that picture on the red desk? Honest to God, with teeth everywhere, horrendous. And the song, yeah, that's pretty embarrassing. So thanks, Kat, for that. Just want to thank everyone for being here. So obviously, there's a lot of talk in the community about, you know, the depth of the community and the caliber, and we get a lot of compliments, but fundamentally the thing that makes this what it is the fact that we can get all you amazing people in the room and all contributing and all kind of sharing knowledge, ideas, wisdom, insights, what's working, what's not, etc. So massive thank you for you all making the effort to be here. Obviously big thanks to our sponsors who you can see there, because this cost an awful lot of money to put on, so thanks for helping to pay for it. I guess there's some new faces in the room, so I wanted just to make sure that everyone kind of knows what we do, because I was on a call earlier this week where I was having a conversation and basically telling somebody what we do as a business, and they actually didn't know. So they were like, oh, we just thought you did a podcast. I was like, great. Perfect. So for those of you that don't know, obviously we run a search business. We focus on building data analytics and AI leadership teams, and then doing the whole team build out of the practitioners, for want of a better phrase, that sit beneath them at the mid to senior level, I guess. Beyond that, then we do a whole kind of workforce advisory piece, so pretty prevalent at the moment, but helping businesses to develop competency frameworks, skill matrices, career pathways, learning pathways, etc., etc. So we do a lot around that, and then obviously a massive part of who we are as a business is the community piece. So obviously the podcast, which I know we've got many of you have been guests on the show, and many of you are listeners. So again, thank you for that. These events, obviously our mentorship program, and the magazine, which you can see in front of you. So yeah, kudos to Kat, because I'll be completely candid with you. Apart from the article that I'd written, I have nothing to do with this. So Kat, it's all on you. Thank you to all the contributors. Read through it, and it's truly amazing. So thank you. Make sure you take them home. If anyone wants a physical copy sent for teams or bosses or whatever, let us know. We can send some out. So let's jump into it. We've got the first panel discussion, which I'm really looking forward to. Make sure, we want this to be engaging and interactive, so please make sure you are using Slido to get your questions in. And yeah, I guess let's welcome up on stage guests of our first panel discussion. So we've got Davin, we've got Kinnari, we've got Daniel, and we've got Kelly. If you'd like to make your way up to the stage, please. Before we get into this, Kelly, I'll start with you. We can work around. You just want to give a 20-second intro, who you are, what you do, who you work for, etc., please?
Yeah, awesome. Kelly Hume. I'm a partner at Baringa Partners, and I lead our data, AI, and solutions business. Hi everyone, I'm Kinnari, Ladha, Chief Data Officer at Merlin Entertainment.
Daniel Hume, and I am the Chief AI Officer for WBP.
Davin, Crowley-Sweet. I lead everything technical for National Highways.
And you're also on the front of our magazine. I have an OBE, so well done. We're talking today about the biggest challenges in data analytics and AI, and I guess how they're being tackled, which in of itself is quite a big topic that we've tried to break down into a few kind of key questions. Davin, I'll start with you and we can work our way around, but I guess from a data quality, interoperability, governance challenges, what do you think is kind of top of mind when you think about what those challenges are in today's kind of data world?
Nice, easy question to start. Seriously, I don't think there's any challenges with the technology, and I think we've had the technology to be successful for the past 30 years. but have not properly invested as organisations to make it work. I think when people badger on about data being crap, I find it funny because the first thing I ask them is, what does good data look like? And they've never been able to answer the question. And if you don't know what good looks like, how do you know the data you've got is terrible? So I think we're not dealing with a data quality problem globally. I think we're dealing with a data confidence problem. And then I think, where does that data confidence issue stem from? And it's a really rubbish scenario, but my mum used to read stories to me when I was a kid. And I'm not a civil engineer, but I know what a bridge is because she probably read Billy Goat's Gruff and told me what a bridge was. So I've grown up with a language in my life that describes the real world and things that I don't need to be a competent civil engineer, but I can have a conversation with an engineer about a bridge. I couldn't do the same about an enterprise service bus. And I think what is really lacking at the moment is the leaders of our industries, who are generally the people who are leading the countries, have grown up without a lexicon of data in their language and in their data things. And I think they're unable to have rich conversations at a meaningful level. So what ends up happening is we end up buying more SaaS solutions and then wondering why we're not getting returns. So I think the biggest thing that is probably on my radar is, how do I help NEDs and executive lead digitally centric organizations by giving them the language where they can have a sensible conversation.
Yep, very good. Kelly, I'll come to you because obviously working in the consulting landscape, you get to work across different industry sectors, different size and scales of businesses and so on and so forth. What do you think about that particular question?
So I think that there's, as we've just mentioned, there's often a lack of trust of data. So understanding where your data resides, making sure that the data you have is well governed and trusted is critical. And then I think we see organizations hiding a lot behind like legacy platforms and the inertia that provides, and actually lacking confidence to use the data in those legacy systems, which you can still abstract and create the intelligence on top of those. So I think it's back to the trust in the data that is typically the issue. I think the ability to leverage data where it resides today and still provide great intelligent solutions on top is feasible if people have this trust and belief.
Yeah, 100%. Kinnari, anything to add on there?
Well, I think you talked about interoperability, right? So I think about all the teams we work with, the teams in IT, infrastructure. What we've found at Merlin is moving away from very much of a project mindset and having siloed teams working separately has been a game changer, moving to like product ways of working. And by that I mean, forget the purest approach of agile, but having actually team squads together. So you've got your sort of technical teams and you've got your data teams and the business working as an end-to-end. What I found is, like you said, that is the most important thing, to make sure you're able to, those teams then have a sense of autonomy, they own something. It's not a project done and dusted, it's someone else's responsibility. Because what happens is the blame then shifts on to someone else. So the other team didn't get what they want, well, the blame is on the team that didn't put the requirements in. So it's been a bit of a game changer for us that we've had to do it quite slowly, and the difference is in the impact and the output.
Yeah. Daniel, I'll come to you on that question, but obviously I know all of your work is done around the premise of AI, and there's some really kind of cool cutting edge stuff that you're doing around that in terms of like consciousness and all this crazy stuff that I'll be honest, I couldn't keep up on the podcast. But as it relates to data quality and governance and the challenges facing, obviously as we move into this kind of AI era with all the hype that sits around that, what do you think the biggest challenges are?
How spicy am I allowed to be?
As spicy as you want.
Yeah, right. So as I agree, I don't think there's a technology problem. I don't even think there's a data problem. There's a leadership problem. Is that every time there's a new technology that comes, we get excited. We then hire data scientists 10 years ago. We hire now generative AI experts, and then we try and apply those technologies to solving the wrong problems. And it fails, we blame the technology. And the reality is that humans are not really good at understanding what the right technologies are to solve the right problems. 10 years ago, we were told to build data lakes, put Tableau on top, hire some data scientists, and hopefully by extracting insights from data, those insights will lead to better decisions. Giving human beings better insights doesn't typically lead to better decisions. There was going to be a bubble there, and it burst. And so I think always start with a problem. Always start with a friction you're trying to solve and work backwards. I know it sounds obvious, but it doesn't happen. Also ask yourself, can you attract, retain AI talent? Most organizations can't. They hire a handful of people, and in 2 years' time, they'll leave, leaving a whole lot of technology behind that you can't maintain. And also you should ask yourself as well, have I ever built and scaled software in my organization? And if the answer is no, you're probably not going to do the same thing for AI. So you have to be really, and the other thing as well is that people are applying these technologies, solving primarily low-hanging fruit and what is it, quick wins. We hear this a lot, but low-hanging fruit and quick win projects are probably not valuable to your organization. They're probably going to be solved by a third-party vendor in a year's time. Focus on solving the hard problems that are going to differentiate your business. I think the problem is leadership, ultimately placing the wrong bets.
100%. And I want to get onto the whole kind of legacy systems and leadership and culture in a minute, but it would be remiss of us not to talk about AI and the hype and making the right bets, as Daniel said. Davin, I'll come to you. How do you go about cutting through that noise as it relates to probably the leadership question?
I think you've got to be brave enough to put your neck on the line and make things as simple as possible, even if that means people hearing uncomfortable truths about how they've historically run the company. I think that's what I've tried to do. I've not been sacked yet. There's still time. I think we just need to make things really, really simple for people, whether it's AI or blockchains or insert low code, latest buzzword here. Ultimately, someone or something needs to make a better decision to solve a specific problem. And I'm with you, Daniel. I don't think most people know what problems they want to solve. I just think they're caught up in urgency. And I always laugh, and if you're a technology vendor in the room, don't take this personally, but well, maybe take it personally, I don't know. Yeah, that's you. There's only two people who refer to their customers as users. One of them is the software sector, and the other is the narcotics industry. And I think it's something telling about that. And I think we need to wean ourselves off of these shiny things and low-hanging fruits, and really get to the nub of what problem is there to be solved. And I don't think there's a data leader in this room that knows exactly what needs to be really solved, but isn't able to have that conversation with their executive through fear of what will happen to me if I expose something or if I challenge this or challenge that. And I think the two things that need to happen really, I suppose, is senior leaders becoming more digitally literate in how they lead organisations, and data leaders becoming a little more fearless and risk adverse. I think there's a real tendency for us to shy away from risk and cry behind the CTO rather than properly take the lead and put your neck on the block.
Kelly, what do you think? Cutting through the AI hype? Again, you'll see this from a whole variety of different businesses that are kind of saying, can we do AI on that?
Yeah,
whatever that means.
Absolutely. Couldn't agree more with the comments just there. So I guess we get asked by so many clients to come in and tell them all of their AI use cases. And it's sort of like, creating a long list of ways you can apply AI is not the right way to think about it. So we try to pivot that to what are the biggest challenges facing your organization today, and how maybe could AI help you with those things? How can it be a differentiator for your organization? Like, you could probably use AI, to solve most problems, but it doesn't mean it's the right answer. So yeah, how's it really going to be a strategic differentiator, and really where can you deploy it to solve the things you otherwise wouldn't be able to solve for?
Nice. Kinnari, what's going on in Merlin, cutting through the AI?
They all want AI, don't they? When are we going to do AI? Sometimes we get questions like that from the exec. I think for us, it's really, we know what the pain points are. If any of you have been to a theme park, it's making sure we can, satisfy guest experience, make sure we can improve the experience in the park, but make sure we've got operational efficiency, and then also make sure we can optimize the revenues, price our tickets. And there's a lot of technology out there and tools that we can leverage AI. So it's really trying to unlock what are the friction points and what can you really add value, rather than looking at something and thinking it's AI and it's actually not, it's like a POC and it hasn't actually scaled to anything. So I think it's really having a focus area there, and that's what we're trying to pivot around at the moment. Do we have a AI strategy? No, we don't, So I think people think we're doing AI, not really. I could say I'm doing AI because my data engineers don't code and they use AI. Well, probably AI in a way, So we are starting to sort of push the boundaries there, but I think it comes back down to the leadership and really making them understand what do we mean by AI and what are the pain points. It just goes back to the same thing that you said, that we're using data to solve problems. Here comes AI supercharging it, aren't you, really? And how can we really explain that to the senior leadership team?
Yeah, I was going to say, I don't know. One of the things I feel why the hype exists is because You know, we kind of forget that data is very native to us. You know, I don't worry if my phone stops working because I know what to do because technology is native to me. But for most people, it isn't. And I think when ChatGPT came on, it became the first proper piece of technology that most people have been able to interact with at a very layman's level without training for a long time and see a result.
Yeah.
And that has just gone mental. So I'm seeing it as an opportunity that there is a whole load of people that once you ease their emotional tension they have with the surface, that they're able to change and able to use it. So that's why I'm focusing on leadership behaviours, and that's what I've seen at least.
Daniel, what do you think about this? Because I know you're really big, and we spoke about this in the podcast we did only several weeks ago, where you talked about, again, making the right bets, and you know the kind of things that a lot of businesses are getting sucked into probably aren't the right bets. But I think a lot of businesses go through the motions of doing it just so they can say, we're doing AI,
Yeah.
right? And I've spoken to executives who are like, yeah, we're doing AI at scale. Everyone's using Copilot, and I'm like, okay. What do you think on the AI hype piece?
So I wrote an article a few weeks ago on LinkedIn that seems to be getting some traction. It was arguing that AI isn't a bubble, it's a mountain. And when I say a bubble, I think there is a financial bubble around AI. I think there's mass speculation, and in some respects it's overhyped. On the other hand, you know, often we think of bubbles as being something that is hot air surrounded by a thin veneer that soon will be kind of exposed. AI is not a bubble. The fact is, if you apply these technologies in the right way, if you understand where to apply them, they will drive a massive amount of value. The hard thing is understanding how to apply the technologies and how to extract value. So I argue it's like a mountain full of gold, and unfortunately, you know, when you get told there's a mountain full of gold, anybody that can spell shovel is now going to start selling you services. And let me give you a thought experiment. Actually, I was just thinking about it over here. I don't know how this is going to come across, but let's imagine over the next year, quantum computing becomes a thing, right? We have a breakthrough and we can now do quantum computing. Just imagine what will happen over that first 12 months. Everybody will rebrand themselves as chief quantum officer, quantum ops, quantum engineers, quantum consultants, without understanding at all what quantum computing is. A superficial 101 understanding of qubits and blah. And the reality is that that's what's happened with AI, is that over the past 3 years, most people have rebranded themselves as AI experts. They don't know really what AI is or how to apply them to the right technology. So in terms of cutting through the hype, the challenge is identifying what I argued in the article is people that have consistently struck gold in applying these technologies. Like, if you're going to engage with people that understand about AI, ask them, prove to you that they've consistently understood how to drive value from it. That would be how I would cut through the hype.
Nice. I guess a lot of businesses are kind of on this journey, and they're trying things and kind of test and learn and all the kind of usual buzzwords that come around that. But a lot of businesses are tied into legacy systems, kind of risk-averse cultures, and all of that type of stuff. How can businesses, and I'll come to you again, Davin, how can businesses that are that way inclined kind of embrace almost the pace required and maybe the experimentation required to get ahead or stay ahead or whatever the case may be?
Yeah, I think there's an interesting culture that exists in my organisation, that they've started from a road manufacturer, road builder, construction company. And that culture is so deep, they even approach digital projects the same way without realising they're doing. So, you know, the way you build a road is you add a bit more road to it, and then you add a bit more road to that, and then you make the tyre mark new. And they try to treat their IT the same way. So I'm trying to pull them out to say, no, you don't need to build technology by adding to the technology you had 20 years ago. You can treat this if it was a brownfield site and start from scratch. And the breakthrough we've had recently, and it came through some examples of using AI over CCTV cameras, and rather than control rooms full of people watching video cameras to keep you safe, can I have small armies of AI doing it 24/7 on every camera? It made people realise that technology is not the limiting factor of an organisation anymore, because most of these technology products are commodity products for the most part. The limiting factor is, are you as an executive really going to do it? Are you really going to emotionally invest in it? And are you prepared to change your business process around the technology, as opposed to adding more technology to technology you didn't want, to business processes that you don't like, that aren't going to be strategic anyway? And I think once they have that light bulb moment, I think then my role is actually about how to help the business redesign its process, not how to implement AI, which is a very different stance on I think, for me at least.
Kinnari, what do you think?
It's so the thing, the limiting factor at Merlin, same approach, takes 7 years to build a ride. So they want to know exactly how much the ride is going to cost, when the return on investment is going to happen, what bits of the ride are going to be, it's like very much a waterfall. That's absolutely fine for a ride, not for a digital or data project. So we have to change the mindset in terms of the way it was funded as well. So we had to change the process by which we want to deliver and develop digital products. And so it needed a mindset shift for the execs. And we had to specifically call out that this is not how you fund it. It was a really hard job for us to do, but again, it comes back down to what the business process in your organisation, and how do they need to now evolve with what you're trying to achieve. And we don't know in some cases actually what the ROI is, but we do know we need to do a big discovery phase, So it's breaking it down into chunks and then releasing the funding and making sure you're able to prove out the value of what you're doing, but design that program or project in a way that's going to start giving you quick wins very quickly. And they talked about sort of limiting factors. I think there's some information in up front, there's some that you won't ever know, but it's changing the mindset of how you actually, the business process around the organisation.
Nice. Daniel, what do you think as it relates to the pace and the experimentation needed for a business to get ahead doing this in terms of, I guess, especially placing the right bets?
So if we're talking about a generative AI, because there's lots of different types of AI out there, but if we just talk about generative AI, what we're doing in WP is we have a dual strategy. One is we have a self-serve model, and let's rewind 10, 15 years ago where, again, we were told to build data lakes, put Tableau on top, and hopefully people in the organization will self-serve and find insights, as well as your own data-sized team to find insights. But actually, we can now make this work with agents. You can create self-serve models where people can build agents that solve problems. Now, you have to watch what they're building. You make sure there's not duplication, etc. Arguably, agents or AIs are like intoxicated graduates. And so if you're not going to hire an intoxicated graduate to do that job, then don't do an AI to take that job. So I say that's a good sanity check. But enabling people to actually self-serve and apply these technologies to solving frictions is on the one hand, but you need to monitor, you need to govern. And then you also need to ask yourself, well, there are needs across the organization where AI or agents can apply to. And then going back to your point, you do need to put a business case around it. You don't need to put a complex business case around it. In my company, we have a very simple 8 criteria that is the data available to actually answer the question, do we have the skills to build it, what's the potential return on investment. There's a handful of these criteria that we use to prioritize those needs, and then we start knocking them off one by one. So we have like a centralized approach to building AIs and agents to solve real frictions, and we have a self-serve model as well. But what you do need to do, you need to monitor it, because these things are like intoxicated graduates, and we are enabling people to unleash them across the organization, and they will fail and they will go wrong, and then there'll be a lot more emphasis on regulation and testing and all that boring stuff.
Can I ask you, Daniel, how open are organizations to embracing that type of thing? Because it feels to me like in a lot of businesses they'd be like, oh, God, we're hiring a load of drunken kids.
Yeah, I certainly the organisations I work with, who tend to be quite innovative, are open, but you have to obviously put the right guardrails and things like that around them. Some organisations just think, well, AI is going to completely transform my business, and I'm going to put my fingers in the ear, bury my head in the sand, and hope it doesn't happen to me, which is not the right approach. So I encourage organisations to do this dual approach: self-serve but centralised AI. I think that's the right strategy.
Nice. Kelly? Speed and experimentation?
So I agree with all the comments. I guess we see lots of clients that are constantly looking for silver bullet, looking for it's Databricks, it's AWS, it's insert name, yeah. So it's the solution which will come and solve all of the problems, right from the data governance right way through to giving you an agentic solution. I guess. As you mentioned, what we're really seeing traction in is being brought in with small teams that have the ability to execute. So work with clients and find a value case and deliver on it. And you can do that really quickly if you're, I think, given the free reins to do so. And it's interesting as a consultant, we often get brought in to do things which our clients are completely capable of doing themselves if they were given the time, the space and the remit to do so. But often they'll bring in a third party to do it on their behalf. And I think we do get the license to sort of find the right bits of data, the one value case, and deliver it pretty rapidly to production in 3 months. And everyone's like, wow, that's amazing. But they could have done that themselves. It's just that they're not, they wrap themselves up in in their own red tape often. So yeah, it's quite interesting.
Because I was going to ask, what's the driver behind that? Is it validation that they want external advice of what the right bet is to pick?
Potentially, or just the fact that often I guess you don't get the right skills and capability ring-fenced. I think, they get caught up still doing a day job of managing teams and lots of internal meetings. So having the actual space to focus, and then the remit of all the right parts of the business. So you often act as a bit of a mediator across change management, technology, and the business to pull all that together. So yeah, it's quite interesting that it's not often a capability, it's more the orchestration of it.
Interesting. Davin, someone touched upon guardrails a second ago, and I guess we've got to try and keep pace with the evolving legal requirements that are here and coming and changing and so on and so forth. I guess in the world of AI, is regulation a hindrance, or is it a necessity to be able to kind of ensure successful adoption?
I think it's a hindrance if it's poorly thought out by people who don't understand it, who are reacting to panic. I think it's essential, like you want people to do things safely and ethically, really. That's what you want. You want to protect the people that can't protect themselves. My nerves are that the pace of technology changes are outpacing the ability to make legislative changes, and we'll end up with retrospective legislation that actually harms business who just happen to be getting in the road first. But I think people over panic around this legislation. I'd encourage them to read it, like actually read what the legislation says. And they're generally so high level and so accommodating that it's more about your interpretation of the legislation. And I go back to this, like what holds people back. And I always hear people are afraid of change. I'm like, are they? Oh, I'm not so sure. Like, how many of you are worried about change when it comes to your personal life? And then suddenly, like, you go into work, it's 9 to 5, and now suddenly change is the scariest thing that happen. So I think what I'm trying to do is look past are people afraid of change, to more what is the consequence of that change you're really afraid of? And then having a meaningful conversation around what is it? Are you worried that your job's gone? Are you worried that you're now somehow less in control and less able to influence decision making? Are you worrying I'm coming after your turf or budgets or things like that? But I mean, I think legislation providing the guardrails should be about helping people who can't protect themselves be protected, because we do unfortunately live in a bit of a mean world where people will use and abuse a lot of these technologies for their own financial or geopolitical gain. Yeah. It's just, even with privacy legislation now, I think Lisa might kill me at this point. Like, everyone will ban it as the thing that stopped the planet and it's so restricted. And I read it and I'm like, it's not. It's just really sensible, helpful stuff. I don't understand why people are worried about it.
Daniel, what's your take on, I guess, the keeping up with the legal requirements of legislation as it relates to AI?
No, I agree. If the EU Act is like, if you're in a high risk industry, you have to explain how your algorithms are making decisions. I think that's perfectly reasonable. Of course, you need to explain. Where it's challenging is that even in low risk industries, you do have the ability to use algorithms that exploit people's unconscious biases and things like that. So by default, you should be making your systems explainable anyway, because it's good practice. It helps you surface insights, it helps you test them better, all that kind of stuff. So, but even absent of regulation, the companies that we work with, and certainly WP, we think very carefully about making sure that we do the right thing. I'm not saying we shouldn't have regulation. I think regulation is important, particularly because if you look at technologies that have the material impact on people's lives, pharmaceuticals, aerospace, automotive, that they have gone wrong, and then the legislation have been put in reactively to solve those problems. But the issue with AI is that it is an incredibly powerful technology, and we will go wrong, it will make mistakes, and legislation will come in, but there is a possibility of it going very wrong. And that's what I'm worried about, is how do we mitigate some catastrophe associated with AI, and that it needs to happen at a global level.
Mm-hmm. Kelly, you think hindrance, necessity?
No, completely agree with those comments. I think it's a necessity, and I guess anybody building AI products and solutions, that is how you design those products and solutions, thinking about best practice, thinking about the data. I guess if you think about adoption, then trust is really the currency. Nobody actually cares about the model. It cares about the output and the ability to trust it. And that's how, I guess, from a change management at a senior level, people want to understand that they can trust it, that you can explain it, that, if they need to explain it to an auditor, that they can explain why it's that model, where the data's coming from. So I think it's critical. I don't think we can get away from it, and it does have the potential to go wrong. So baking all of the best practice into the design thinking is a necessity anyway.
Kinnari, you have a different view?
No, I don't. I think, it's our responsibility because I'm quite lucky in my role that I've got data privacy and governance officer within my area. And you can create all the policies in the world and you can interpret the legislation. People can actually use it, understand it. So I think it's weaving in that way of thinking in the design process, having those people as part of the team thinking about it beforehand, not as an afterthought. So you're thinking about, it's not a tick box exercise. You're not going to ask for permission and hoping it's going to be yes. They'll always end up advising, right? So you still have to make a decision. So it's making sure you are building it into a design phase and ensuring that you've actually sort of covered off any of those areas that should be ethical side of things. So I think it's down to each individual in the team, because we are the ones building those data products. So it is essentially, we can't just expect an audit to come along. And like you said, as I say, the AI police are sort of behind the times still, so we have to take responsibility of that. But it's not to just lock everything down. Our cybersecurity director sent an article the other day and it said most people are actually using AI, so 85% of the workforce are using ChatGPT because it's more, known. And only, I think, in terms of the people that have got Microsoft, only was a really small number. 20% are using Copilot. They use what they're familiar with, but actually it's putting guardrails around. We do know people are uploading information, How do you sort of advise them and make sure that they know what's right and wrong?
I think I've had a brain thing, it's a middle-aged thing. They happen at a delayed reaction. I deal with a huge amount of safety legislation and enforcement legislation and policing legislation in what I do. And you will always find this word in the legislation that says beyond reasonable doubt, at lowest practicable level. They're human concepts. They don't apply to a machine. And I think one of the biggest things our legislative system needs to work out is if we're going to have a legal system based on beyond reasonable doubt, lowest risk possible, how do we interpret those requirements when a machine is making a decision? Or actually what will happen, we'll have all these AIs making the decisions, but it all has to go to a person to actually make the call so that someone is there to be accountable. And I think we need to work out if we're a society that's going to accept not being able to hold a human accountable for something, but holding a machine accountable for something that doesn't feel a consequence. And I think that will be the philosophical conundrum that we come up with over the next decade or so.
Yeah. So we've got some questions coming in, so I'll get to them in a minute because I've got one last one. I've had to refrain from asking a lot of follow-up questions here because I'm conscious that everyone in the audience is probably going to ask the same thing. So, Davin, I think you touched upon ethics at the start of the conversation. How do we need to keep ethics front and center? I know obviously it's going to be similar as the legislation piece and designing it and baking that in. But how, because that is maybe slightly more subjective, right?
Yeah, I think you need to be an organisation that's really driven by your values of the organisation, and they're not just things you put on the screensaver that, we're teamwork, pride, the actual meaningful things that you use to run your company. So if you say safety is your number one priority, how does that feature in your decision-making process? And ethics will mean very different things to very different companies and very different countries and very different cultures. But I think ultimately, you need to not just be driven by accounting rules and legislation and policies, but as an organisation, you need to have a really clear position on what values you stand for, what legacy you want to be known for. We will make mistakes, and how do you want to be judged by history?
Daniel?
So I had 2 points here, and you know by now I'm quite controversial about this. So if you look at, I did some analysis years ago, 15 years ago, on company values. If you put company values through an AI, they all say the same thing, right? All these companies spend millions of dollars on figuring out what their 5 sort of nebulous words are, and one of them is probably integrity and innovation. And sorry if it is, but I think the reason why, and if you actually do the analysis, there are actually 3 groupings of these words. One is how you should behave as a person, and as far as I'm concerned, that should be captured in a code of conduct. Like, you don't have to reinvent virtues. Philosophers have been talking about this for the past 2,000 years. You don't need to reinvent how to operate with integrity. And then the second one is your value to your customers. What is the clear value to your customers? Are you luxury? Are you cheaper, faster? And then what's your value as a company to the world? Are you sustainable? Are you trying to give people access to free? So you have to be really clear about what your values are. When it comes to ethics, and by the way, at some point your AIs on your phone are going to be making purchasing decisions. So at the moment, most people use them for therapy. So you're telling it your hopes, your dreams, your desires. At some point, you will give it purchasing power, and AIs are going to be better rational purchasers than you. So what I'm excited about is actually AIs purchasing goods that align with your values and the values of the company, because we're not very good at that. So AIs might actually be able to hold companies account to achieving their values. When it comes to AI ethics, I have a controversial view, which is there's no such thing as AI ethics. The difference between human beings and AIs is that AIs don't have intent. Human beings have intent, and it's the intent that needs to get scrutinized from an ethics perspective. There are already well-established structures, processes, protocols set up to scrutinize intent. You don't need an AI ethics team. And so I think ethics is actually a distraction, and often people confuse ethics with bias and safety. Your primary problem to solve is explainability. If you can make algorithms explainable, most of the problems around governance go away, but that is very hard. But you don't need a separate AI ethics committee.
It's really interesting, Daniel, because your kind of the buzzword of AI ethics gets the same reaction to you that data culture gets for Davin, which we'll touch upon later, I'm sure. Kelly, I'll come to you. Ethics, front and centre.
I agree with Daniel. I think it's about the explainability, making sure that you understand the data that you've exposed your models to, and that it's not inherently biased. I think that's it, really.
Can I give you an example, actually?
Yeah, go on.
So if imagine you're you're on the board of a ride sharing company like an Uber, and you deploy an algorithm that sets prices, and the goal is to obviously set the most effective price. And it has access to different data sources, including your battery, and it realizes that when your battery on your phone is very low, you're willing to spend more money on your ride. So what it's doing is exploiting vulnerability. You are vulnerable, but it's not doing it intentionally. It just correlated low battery with higher price. You need to make your algorithms explainable so you can catch that. And then you as a human being need to decide, should I prioritize rides according to that? Should I make sure people have chargers, or should I remove that data so I don't exploit those vulnerabilities? So explainability allows you to surface issues, and then it's down to the human to decide whether they can accept that or not.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Kinnari, what do you think?
No, I think I agree with all of what you said. I think it also is when we work with a lot of third parties or software providers, I think it's about getting visibility, because sometimes you do throw your data into a black box. Yeah. So you almost challenge your partners that you're working with that are helping you accelerate to say, what are you thinking about ethics as well in terms of what you're doing there? So I think it sort of falls amongst it. It's part of what you do, right? It can't be an afterthought. It's got to be built into it. But it comes back down to the fact that there are humans making those decisions, right? So let's not make it more complicated than it is.
I can't get past that bombshell. I'm just thinking, where's the nearest power bank I can buy? That's terrifying.
Yeah, it happens.
Yeah. A lot of questions, 15 of them. So we're not going to have time to get through them all if we ask everybody to answer. So I'll start at the top and I'll direct some questions to people. Oh, some people have already done that for me. Thank you very much. So Daniel, someone has asked you how you balance focusing on the hard problems when most data leadership roles have a very short tenure and little time to prove yourself.
Oh, that's a good question. I'm not trying to sell my services here, but I think you need to work with a third-party vendor who's going to provide that continuity. It's good to hire a team that understands about AI, understands your domain, but if you want to have that continuity and not, at some point lose those people and then have technology you can't support, then working with a third party that can provide that continuity is a good solution. And I've seen that kind of model work really well.
Nice, thank you. Nervousness around AI is going to take my job, or AI will remove the entry-level job tier. What's left for the kids growing up? Welcome the panel's opinion. Anyone got a strong view on that wants to take that one?
Yeah, I think the idea that AI replaces the junior is the worst thing your business can do. And I'm watching a lot of the big four consulting companies like bottom slicing their 20% to protect partner profit. And I think they won't exist in 10 years. I actually think it's the companies that preserve the junior employees, that strip out the middle management, that will be more successful. I think the future is for the kids. And it's people like me who've probably got to move out the way who'll be worried.
I have a controversial view, which is, it's a big problem that not hiring graduates, but we know that what we value in people is not just knowledge, but their ability to critical think and be creative and be robust and resilient. And those are the things that we need to be cultivating in people. And our education system is not really set up for that. So if you've got kids, I would try to figure out how do you make them as resilient as possible, because the world is going to change a lot. I would also say there is a lot of scaremongering around not having jobs. I actually think we should create a world without jobs. I know that's a bit controversial, but why not create a world where everybody has access to all of the stuff they need: healthcare, food, education, transport, energy, for free, freeing you up to do whatever you want. That's the world I want to create.
Daniel, I've got about a gazillion. But I'm sure if you've got questions on it, ask Daniel after, because we'll never get off that topic all day. Kelly, your name's in the next question, so I'll come to you on this one. It says, what are the measurable efficiencies from Gen AI you've seen in your business or client? What use case or business domain?
So we have recently launched an internal, something called Smart Draft. That's an agentic solution, sort of 12 agents that help us create proposals. So we get RFPs from like government clients that are pretty intense and huge. We've set up a load of agents that can read across all of our sort of SharePoints, our credentials, our skills, and then interpret that ask and basically create a 70% sort of ready response to a proposal in a couple, half an hour. So obviously that just frees up a lot of the time. I guess a lot of the time we spend as consultancies pulling the right information together from across our organisation, so we can represent the best of Baringa to our clients. And doing that off all of the wealth of work that we've done in a fraction of the time just means that you can really invest the time in making that very specific to the client need and honing it, which is often you're just collating information. So that's been phenomenal. I guess we're working with some of our clients to deploy Gen AI in ENA, Energy Networks Association, speed up the smart sort of low energy connections. So I guess in Drive to Net Zero, we've got that as a 50% auto approval, which would have been 2 engineer visits and a lengthy process to get sort of your carbon low, your sort of car charge, EV charger or something connected at your house. So yeah, some really, really great sort of returns on investment, I would say.
Interesting. Kinnari, I'll come to you next because I'm conscious you've not answered a question. We don't want to leave you out. So if organisations haven't made the investments they should have made over the last 10 years, how do you phase in this requirement without kind of going big bang?
I think you've got to, as a classic example, Merlin, in a lot of organisations are still back in the legacy times. I think you've got to leapfrog. They haven't made investment, then you have to really think about what is available now, what needs to be true for you to be able to leapfrog, because there's no point doing stuff you should have done 10 years ago. But I think it's really honing in that specific use case and make sure you get business buy-in. You need a counterpart in the business. You may have the most amazing data product, but it means nothing if you don't have sort of clear outcome and a KPI to be able to talk about what that's delivered. And I think once you deliver that, you're then able to prove and build the trust and scale that out. So you can't do everything, but if you can do one thing really good end to end, that's only going to give you the sort of trust and the opportunity to grow that and get further investment.
Nice. Davin, I'm going to ask you the next question because this just stinks of data culture to me. And we know that you've got a very controversial take, but if there's a lack of trust in data, how do you build the credibility to build that trust?
I think before people distrust the data, they normally distrust the data leader. So I think there's something around asking yourself honestly if you're in the wrong organisation. So I find, first of all, I always ask myself, I'm not a leader as such. You're only a leader if someone chooses to follow you. So you have to ask yourself, why has anyone got to follow me? And I think the only reason people would choose to follow you is if you were authentically you and they understand what their values are, because I think that will either you will appeal to people or they will understand where your gaps are to know how to sort of work with you to prop you up. And I think if an exec sees you authentically and doesn't like you, then there's nothing wrong with you. You're in the wrong organisation, but you shouldn't try to be someone other than yourself, because that will just create distrust. So I think there's something around getting a personal level of trust in you because you're confident to be yourself and you're confident to lead in a way that's authentic to you. I then think there's the data itself and how do you increase trust in the data. I think that goes back to my point around recognising that data doesn't have an inherent quality to it. Now, if I take the position of a bridge, if I'm maintaining it, plus or minus 100 meters is good. If I'm building it, plus or minus 2 millimeters if good. If I'm doing strategic planning, plus or minus a county is good enough. So what you're using the data for drives how good the data needs to be. And I don't think we've built enough data management and data governance capability in organizations to work with decision makers to drive out what they actually need the data before. And then there's loads of people with loads of uncertainty. So I think there's build your own personal level of trust about how you lead, and there's clarify what good looks like for how you intend to use the data, and then measure it. I don't see enough of data governance and assurance in organizations, and I don't see enough data management organizations. And I asked a really pointy question to our exec lunch, and I said, if I said who maintains a bridge, you'd be able to raise a hand and tell me the exact name, postcode, and probably birthday of the person that manages every bridge. If I said, can you name the person who's managing the data about that bridge, I bet you wouldn't have a clue. And that says to me that we're missing a whole organizational capability around that. And I think if you build the organizational capability, if you have a personal level of trust with the senior leaders, then I think people will not worry about the data because they'll be looking for you for the guidance.
Daniel, you've been called out something you said about challenging companies, how they help the business to challenge companies understand how they're using AI, given the knowledge gap. What is that question? How do we help our businesses to challenge companies to understand how they're using AI, given the knowledge gap?
Come to events like this, learn from experts. I think ultimately, and I agree. Starting with the use cases, I know it sounds boring, but you've got lots of frictions across your organization. Some of those frictions can be solved off the shelf. Some of them you can build yourself. Start with a list of frictions, start knocking them off one by one, build your data capability over time, and you won't go wrong.
Nice. Oh, got one down the bottom. You can see it. Who wants to take this one? What is your top tip for upskilling the exec in data without coming across as too technical or condescending, especially with execs in tech companies? Interesting. Okay. Anyone got an opinion on this?
Do it discreetly. Like take it prolonged over a period of time, one-to-one, because you don't want to embarrass them and make them feel silly in front of their peers. But acknowledge that it needs to happen. And not because you're not a good exec. It's just that this is just, we need to start learning data as a second language almost. I've not made that phrase up. I stole it from someone called Valerie Logan. But I think, do it discreetly, recognize the sensitivities they have and make it super easy. I always try to get my team to tell stories around data rather than talk about the actual data components themselves, but also write it like a newspaper. So I find it frustrating when someone writes like a book where they do the start, the middle, and I have to wait until I've read the whole book before they reach the end. And I think write like a newspaper with the headline. If you need to know more, turn to page 3. If you want the full story, go to page 7. But definitely do it discreetly, keep it simple, and write like a newspaper.
I'd also add to that, which is to validate their egos. So they'll have hypotheses about their business, and instead of trying to tell them stuff they don't know from the data, tell them stuff that they do know and help them quantify it, and then they'll be more bought in when you start telling them things they don't know.
And I think link it to a problem in that exec's area. I find that building those relationships and really understanding how can I solve your problem with my data thing will land a lot more. They don't need to understand all of it. And a lot of us sometimes get an opportunity with the execs and they're all there, right? So take the one that's got the least amount of knowledge and do it at that level. It doesn't matter if the others already know it. That's great, right? You're just going to get asked questions that you know the answer to. But you want to make the least knowledgeable person in that room actually understands it. Then you've succeeded, because the other ones are going to ask questions that you'll be able to do it with your eyes closed. So I think it's really important to build those relationships and really make sure you take the time individually, not in the group, and connect with those execs and make them understand it.
I think making it visually tangible as well is usually helpful if you can, visualize it for them, so it's not just numbers, whether that's a demo, a POC, just something really quick and dirty to help them understand it visually. That often helps.
Yeah, nice. 2 minutes. Do you want to put a question back up or not? There was a great question about CDOs championing product thinking, but the middle managers maybe in the layer below still operating like a service desk, and how do you overcome that, I think was the question. Yeah. Anyone want to tackle that?
I can start.
Yeah, go for it.
I'm living it right now. one, I think working a product for data leader or data team is brilliant, because when you work in a product way of thinking and product way of working, you need the KPIs and data to track if you're actually delivering value. So the first thing is they actually need some data to measure the outcomes. But I think for me, like you said, you have to bring people on that journey. There'll always be the middle managers who are continuing to work for service providers. But I think because they're not part of the broader team, they don't know what their role is actually being part of the sort of cadence of working all together. So it does take a shift, and you don't necessarily have to go so far to the right and be purist. You can do really simple things in terms of sort of creating the right cadences and explain to people what is the vision, why are we here, what we're here to build, and really understanding what everyone's role is. So I think it's a journey. When people say like we're doing agile and product and everything's on Jira, it doesn't necessarily mean you're working in a product way. So I think there's product principles that can be applied, but it takes time. I think you need to sort of role model that. You may not be able to do that everywhere, but even your own teams can start working a lot more closer with the technical or the business teams to make sure that they're able to be successful.
Jesus, you've opened a can of worms there, Kinnari, now, because we're gonna get flooded with what's a data product, what's data as a product.
So, I mean, you and I have talked about this at length. I don't come from a school background. Me and school did not get on well as kids, and I'm a musician by trade. I have a very different view to this weird alien world of business that I still don't understand. And my role as a musician was to write music that created tension, to resolve that tension. And I've come into the business world to seek out tension. And every time I found tension, some twat would say something like, let's take this offline, only to never take it offline, and we never resolve it. And if there's something around this traditional business world that sees tension as conflict and there to be avoided, where I think data products and meeting with the CIOs, these are tensions that we should create and ultimately resolve. And I've nicked this analogy that I often use around the importance of tensions and why they're needed. And I want you to imagine a cello for a moment. And I want you to imagine what it is. And you get wood and you bend it into an impossible shape. And then you get pieces of wire, and then you stretch them over that wood bent into an impossible shape till the wire's about to snap. And then you get some horse's hair and you tension that till that's about to snap. And you bring that tension together and you release the most beautiful note on the planet. And I think there's something around us embracing tensions between people, not running away from them, not seeing them as conflict, and then helping the organizations resolve those tensions where you get those creative forces that really come together.
Nice. I'm glad you brought it back to the music, because I was getting a little bit worried where you were going with that then. There was one final question for Daniel, which we don't have time for, but whoever asked that question, Daniel, I'm sure you'll be happy to pick it up offline. Perfect. Well, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much. Thanks so much.